It's February 29th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with ongoing mass walkouts by doctors. The government said deadline for doctors to return to their posts has arrived, yet the majority of them are showing no sign of doing so. The government offered an official sit-down for talks for the first time since the mass walkout began. European countries, including the UK, Sweden, and Switzerland, are gearing up to reopen their embassies in North Korea after 4 years of shutdown due to the pandemic. A German delegation reportedly visited Pyongyang earlier this week to discuss returning to the embassy there. Top diplomats of South Korea and the U.S., Tae and Antony Blinken, sat down for their first face-to-face talks in Washington, D.C., where the two sides discussed and explored ways to deal with North Korean provocations, especially ahead of South Korea's general election in April and the U.S. presidential election in November. It's the last day the government has set for doctors to return to their patients so that the walkouts can end without holding them legally responsible. And the health ministry is also planning a meeting with doctors today in a bid to find a breakthrough. Our Shin Se-byuk starts us off.
Thursday marks the return-to-work deadline set by the government for doctors protesting the planned medical school quota increase. The government has called on doctors to resume work by February 29th, stating that those who comply will not face any legal penalties. In a final step that would allow the government to file a criminal complaint over the collective action, health ministry officials visited the homes of trainee doctors in person on Wednesday to deliver return-to-work orders. Previously, these orders had been issued through mail or text messages. Those who do not return to work by today will face suspension of their medical licenses or additional legal action. South Korea's medical law stipulates that doctors and other medical personnel who fail to respond to return-to-work orders can face up to 3 years in prison. The health ministry plans to begin tallying the number of trainee doctors who do not return to work next Monday, the first working day after the Thursday deadline, with Friday a national holiday in South Korea. The ministry is then expected to file a complaint with the police, officially initiating legal procedures. The police are expected to issue arrest warrants for those who fail to respond to a summons without reasonable cause. Amid rising tensions between doctors and the government, some residents are now making moves to return to their posts. At Konkuk University Hospital in Seoul, 12 out of approximately 200 trainee doctors returned as of February 26th. At Cheonnam National University Hospital, 7 out of around 120 residents who were ordered to resume work returned to their posts last week, and Chosun University Hospital has seen 7 out of 113 residents come back. Meanwhile, the health ministry has scheduled a discussion at 4 p.m. on Thursday in Seoul. The second vice minister of Health and Welfare, Bang Min-soo, has reached out to the resigning resident doctors, inviting them for a dialogue. Despite multiple public invitations, Park has yet to secure successful dialogue. He has clarified that the meeting is open not just to the representatives from the Korean Intern and Resident Association, but also to any resident doctor eager to join the conversation. Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News.
Top diplomats of South Korea and the U.S. met in Washington and held talks on nuclear threats from North Korea, amid concerns that the regime could engage in more provocations ahead of parliamentary elections in South Korea in April and the U.S. presidential election in November. South Korea's Foreign Minister Tae met with his American counterpart Antony Blinken on Wednesday local time and discussed the importance of bilateral as well as trilateral cooperation with Japan to better respond to those threats. Now, this was their first bilateral meeting since Yoon took office last month. And with an upgraded combat readiness against the North's ever-growing threats, South Korea and the U.S. will begin their annual combined joint military drills. And this year's edition will be double the size of last year's. Our Peunji reports.
Starting next Monday, the military forces of South Korea and the U.S. will hold their major combined exercise, the Freedom Shield. In a joint press briefing on Wednesday, the two countries explained that the computer-simulated command post training will focus on conducting multi-domain operations in countering North Korea's nuclear operations.
The Republic of Korea and the United States militaries will conduct the Freedom Shield exercise to increase combined readiness and strengthen combined defensive posture for 11 days, from March 4th through the 14th.
They said the training will be based on scenarios that reflect diverse threats within the security environment, such as drills detecting and targeting cruise missiles. They've also decided to increase the number of field training exercises on land, at sea, and in the air to increase interoperability.
There will be a total of 48 combined field training exercises taking place all across the Korean peninsula, including joint airstrike training, joint tactical live fire exercises, joint air-to-air shooting, and air-to-ground bombing exercises.
This means the Allies will conduct twice the number of field exercises in the first half of this year compared to the same period last year. But this year's exercises won't be limited to just the U.S. and South Korea. Member states of the United Nations Command, including Australia, Canada, France, and the UK, will also be taking part. And the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission will observe the drills based on the armistice agreement. The combined exercises are expected to anger North Korea, as the regime sees joint training as an invasion rehearsal. There is a possibility that the North may engage in provocations during the exercise period in protest. 배은지, Arirang News.
Weapons for Russia and food for North Korea. That's been the deal between the two sides. But how to stop them from engaging in illicit activities? For more, we're joined by Professor Kim Hyung-jung. Great to have you back.
Thank you. Very good morning.
CSIS reported just yesterday that there have been at least 25 rounds of shipments carrying ammunition since last August. And the defense chiefs of Seoul and Washington once again vowed to sternly deal with North Korea's arms deals with Russia. At this point, the weapons for a food deal between the two is pretty much a given now, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, this is a definitely win-win situation for Russia and North Korea. Russia needs weapons for the Russian-Ukraine war, and North Korea needs food and other economic resources from Russia. North Korean shipping sent 7,000 containers of weapons to Russia for use against Ukraine. This win-win situation and relation will be continue, and this is very difficult to stop their cooperation. This is not just Korean Peninsula issue, but global security challenge beyond the Korean Peninsula. So not just Korea or U.S., but international community have to stop this kind of a dangerous cooperation.
Right, that's why there are ways to deal with the obvious arms collaboration between Pyongyang and Moscow include, like you said, the international community's collective voices and sanctions. But what other realistic and effective ways are there to actually stop the two?
Yes, international community together voice to stop this military cooperation and try to sanction on this one. But nonetheless, unfortunately, there is no effective way to stop Russia and North Korea because they are already under the sanction by international community like the United Nations, and this sanction are also not very effective. So actually, talks and diplomatic efforts are only measures, and also at the same time, international community, including Korea, have to closely watch and prepare any types of scenario from this military cooperation, because this is not just one-time happening event, but more long-term cooperation.
Definitely. And on top of those weapons deals, South Korea's defense minister also hinted at the possibility of the North launching its next spy satellite before South Korea launches another of its own from this time Florida in early April. Professor Kim, what's your take on this? I mean, why is North Korea rushing?
Yeah, North Korea over the months and over the years have to very invest, even though they have a very difficult economic situation on this type of provocation, including satellite. North Korea satellite, not just satellite, this is more relevant to the North Korea missile technology like ICBM and re-entry technology. So North Korea prepared for 2024 U.S. presidential election. Before that, North Korea want to and try to have maximize this military capability without reducing any types of a possibility of negotiation after the U.S. presidential election and possible negotiation with the Trump administration. At the same time, increasing its negotiation leverage by strengthening its military capability, like satellite capability. So North Korea satellite is very much dangerous. That the provocation and international community have to stop this one, and Korea and U.S. have to closely watch this type of satellite provocation.
Right, and to better counter growing provocations from the north, Seoul and Washington will be conducting a combined military drill for about 2 weeks, starting next week. The question is, will this regular exercise be able to nudge the north from going ahead with military provocations? What do you think?
Yeah, regardless, ROK and U.S. have a military exercise more or less. North Korea continue their provocation, and it is a very nature is offensive. ROK-US combined exercise is very much defensive purpose against North Korea provocation. Always open their schedule in advance to North Korea, and North Korea always conducted their nuclear and missile test. Even though there has international sanction. So this exercise have to be continued, and now mostly field exercise, not just table top exercise like TTX. North Korea will continue to provocation against this, whether we continue or not. So we don't have to stop, and this is an exercise for defense purpose, and there is no reason to reduce combined exercise. ROK-US have to closely watch and prepare any possibility, possible provocation of North Korea during the combined exercise or after the combined exercise.
Right, that's why North Korea issues, including its provocations, topped the agenda during the talks between foreign ministers of South Korea and the U.S. They are Cho Tae-yeol and Antony Blinken, right?
Yes, right. The both foreign minister, Mr. Blinken and Mr. Cho Tae-yeol, will talk on North Korea and missile as well as the human rights issue as well. In particular, recent Russia and North Korea cooperation is top concern on the table because this is not just a Korean Peninsula issue, as beyond the Korean Peninsula issue as a global security challenge. Two foreign ministers try to solve this problem by strengthening ROK-US alliance like extended deterrence and combined exercise, also expanding diplomatic measure or military cooperation like trilateral cooperation among ROK, US, Japan, and also multilateral cooperation like NATO or Indo-Pacific countries are other measures against North Korea's threat under this table.
All right, Professor Kim Young-jun, thank you so much for your insights. As always, you have a great day.
Thank you very much for having me.
Several European countries are preparing to reopen their embassies in North Korea. All European nations with embassies in Pyongyang withdrew from their posts in early 2020 as the North began closing up its border due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Our Lee Seung-ja has more.
In January 2020, North Korea began closing up its border in a bid to prevent the COVID-19 virus from spreading in its own country. Having one of the world's strictest border controls at the time, all European nations withdrew from their embassies in Pyongyang. However, 4 years on from their departure, a number of European embassies in the North Korean capital will reopen in the near future. According to a Reuters report on Wednesday, Britain's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office is discussing plans with the North Korean embassy in London for a technical and diplomatic delegation to visit Pyongyang. A spokesperson from the Foreign Office said it welcomes the return of some diplomats to Pyongyang and North Korea's move to reopen its borders, adding that it asked North Korea to allow entry for the international community, including all diplomats, UN agencies, and non-governmental humanitarian organizations. Sweden's special envoy for the Korean Peninsula, Peter Samneby, said there had been some progress regarding his return to Pyongyang. The return of North Korean diplomats to their overseas posts has also been a slow and gradual process. Last August, the regime cautiously began sending their ambassadors to pro-North Korean countries such as China, Russia, Mongolia, and Cuba. Other European nations are beginning the process of returning diplomats to Pyongyang, as the German Foreign Ministry said that it will begin inspecting their embassy, which had been left vacant for years before its ambassador returns. The Swiss Foreign Ministry is also discussing a visit to North Korea to resume humanitarian projects by the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation. Switzerland has been conducting support projects for North Korea with the Development Cooperation Office in Pyongyang since 1997, which it withdrew from in March 2020. 이승재, Arirang News.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy on Wednesday visited the Balkan Peninsula for the first time since the outbreak of the Ukraine crisis, requesting military support from leaders of the countries in the region. Speaking at the Ukraine Southeast Europe Summit held in Albania, Zelenskyy said the low ammunition supply is affecting the situation on the battlefield and called on Balkan leaders for help. He also proposed holding a Ukraine-Balkan Defense Forum to strengthen arms cooperation. Now, due to setbacks in military support from Western allies, Zelenskyy has been traveling around the world to drum up support for Ukraine. He recently held talks with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia over a prisoner exchange with Russia. President Yoon is expected to meet with Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg this morning on the last day of the tech mogul's three-day trip to Seoul. The two are likely to discuss future cooperation in areas including AI and semiconductors, with President Yoon encouraging the U.S. businessman to collaborate with South Korean firms. Yoon has been actively meeting with prominent business leaders in the digital sector, including those of Apple, Tesla, Netflix, and OpenAI, to seek opportunities for greater business and investment in the country. On Wednesday, Zuckerberg met with the chiefs of Samsung and LG Electronics. It is his second trip to Seoul after his visit in 2013, during which he met with then President Park Geun-hye and local SMEs.
Good morning, I'm Choi Ji-hee, and now we turn over to stories from around the world. We begin today in Texas, where a wildfire known as the Smokehouse Creek Fire, now the second largest in Texas history and the worst in 36 years, continues to burn through the Texas Panhandle region since starting on Monday afternoon. As of Wednesday, the fire has burned at least 850,000 acres of land and is 3% contained, according to the Texas A&M Forest Service. The extent of the damage from the fires is still being assessed, but the blaze has burned more than 3,300 square kilometers and jumped into parts of neighboring Oklahoma. Parts of multiple Texas counties were ordered to evacuate on Tuesday. Schools were closed, and officials warned residents of potentially large property losses. Dry grass and warm temperatures on top of strong winds are fueling the blaze, making containment difficult. However, rainfall is forecast for Thursday morning. Moving over to Russia, the funeral of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, seen as the most high-profile critic of Vladimir Putin, will take place in Moscow on Friday. Navalny died suddenly in a remote Arctic prison earlier this month. Yulia Navalnaya, the widow of Alexei Navalny, announced on Wednesday the date of his funeral. However, she expressed uncertainty about whether the funeral will go smoothly as planned. After Navalny's death, dozens of his supporters were detained by the authorities when they laid flowers at various memorial sites. Navalny's associates initially wanted to hold his funeral on Thursday, but no venues were willing to host it due to Putin's scheduled annual State of the Nation address to Russia's Federal Assembly. The funeral will now take place at the Church of the Icon of the Mother of God in Moscow. Afterward, Navalny will be buried in the nearby Borisovsky Cemetery. On Wednesday, the U.S. Senate's longest-serving party leader, Mitch McConnell, announced his decision to leave his position as the Republican Senate leader in November. The 82-year-old Kentucky senator has held a seat in the Senate since 1985 and has served as the leader of the Senate Republican Conference since 2007. Recently, several members of his conference have demanded he step down and make way for a younger, more Trump-aligned leader. Though he will no longer be a Senate leadership, he plans to remain in Congress through the remainder of his term, which expires in 2027. And finally, to a breakthrough in the fight against dengue fever, with British biotech company Oxitec's development of genetically modified mosquitoes to combat a surge in cases in Brazil. Brazil is currently facing a significant outbreak of the dengue virus, which is being fueled by the country's hot, rainy season. As of February 27th, over 973,000 cases of dengue have been reported this year in Brazil alone. Oxitec's mosquitoes carry a gene that kills female offspring, which can transmit diseases before they mature. According to an official from Oxitec, the mosquito population is 90% lower in areas where the company's mosquitoes have been released compared to other areas.
Good morning. We are wrapping up the month on a cloudy note, but with rain in certain parts of the country. Jeju Island is seeing showers. It sure rains frequently there, while mountainous regions on the island are seeing snow with a heavy snow advisory in place, with 3 to 8 centimeters of snow in the forecast, while parts of Jeollado and Gyeongsang-Namdo province could see 1 to 5 centimeters. The rest of the southern regions will see light showers today. Now, this round of wet weather will bring spring cold. We can feel the chill from this afternoon with sharp winds. Then please brace for freezing conditions for the start of March. Afternoon highs will be 1 to 8 degrees lower than yesterday. Seoul and Daejeon top out at 8 degrees. Gwangju and Daegu will be breezier than Seoul, topping out at 7 degrees Celsius this afternoon. It will rain across Korea during the Independence Movement Day weekend, and brief sprinkle will hit its peak on Saturday morning before easing off in the afternoon. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
We thank you for watching New Day at Arirang. We'll be back next week for Monday's edition at the same time, 9 a.m. Korea time.
Welcome. 엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 하나, 둘, 셋.
Hey, Mr. Cupid, look my way. Make sure you listen to what I say. I may be stupid or quite naive.
끝없이 쏟아지는 포토스팟. 휴대폰 한 대로 감당할 수 있겠니?
through my heart.
웰컴. (24시간) 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 하나, 둘, 셋.
Hey, Mr. Cupid, look my way. Make sure you listen to what I say. I may be stupid or quite naive.
끝없이 쏟아지는 포토스팟. 휴대폰 한 대로 감당할 수 있겠니?
Arrow straight through my heart.
한국에 오면 먹어야죠. 먹어도 끝이 없는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
We're here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's February 29th here in Seoul. I'm Yoon, and you're watching News Generation. Joining me in the studio is Cheska Dainhong.
Happy last day of February, everyone.
Happy Thursday. And Park Ki-hoon.
Good morning.
Now, both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. As usual, let's start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. Our first story, the widow of billionaire investor David Gottesman has donated $1 billion to cover tuition for students at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. Ruth Gottesman, who used to work as a professor at the college, inherited her husband's money when he died in September of 2022. At the time, she told the New York Times that her husband left her a whole portfolio of Berkshire Hathaway stock instructions. When he was alive, he shared a close friendship with the founder of Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett. Gottesman's donation will help all fourth-year students at the university be reimbursed for their spring 2024 semester tuition. Also from August, all students will receive free tuition. South Korean baseball player Lee Jung-ho made his San Francisco Giants debut on Tuesday. He singled in his first round at the bat in part of a 5-run inning in the Giants' 10-10 tie with Seattle. His performance proved that Lee came up to par with his lucrative salary, which some said was an overpayment. Lee signed a 6-year, $113 million deal this winter and is seen as both the starting center fielder and leadoff hitter. Back in 2022, Lee was the MVP in Korea's baseball league, but he missed almost all the final 2 months of the last season after going through surgery to repair a fractured ankle. And over in the U.S., the state of Florida has passed legislation banning anyone under the age of 16 from social media platforms. For a while, those supporting this move said it would better protect young people from online risks to their mental health. This measure is going to the desk of the Governor Ron DeSantis on Thursday. If signed into law, it would require social media platforms to terminate the accounts of teens and use a third-party verification system to screen out those who are underage. Now, Florida's governor last month raised concerns over this bill, though, citing how it infringes on privacy rights. He said while he agrees that social media could be harmful for children, it should really be up to the parents to supervise them, especially over their social media habits at home. This always seems to be the debate when we talk about healthy social media habits and how to facilitate them. Those who believe the government needs to amend and strengthen legislation point to the plethora of harmful content that causes young users to fall victim to anxiety, depression, or mental illnesses. Critics, though, point to how this goes against one's freedom of expression or speech, which is exactly why I would like to ask what our panelists think about this debate. Where do you stand on this issue?
I remember we talked about this issue before on one of our episodes, and I said it's really up to the children's parents to take more responsibility over how much exposure they should be allowing their children on social media. Look, I think it's great to see that Florida State is heading in the right direction, and to even see Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg actually sincerely apologize to the parents of the exploited children at a Senate hearing. Personally, I try to refrain from using too much social media because I too know I've actually experienced how addictive and harmful it can be to not only your mental health but also your physical health, because you're always in front of the screen. And even adults, not just children, have a hard time staying away from their phones, especially on social media. So I think it's not just the children who are affected, but also us as well. And lastly, I think stronger restrictions should be imposed on how much freedom there is on social media platforms and how much we should be able to see and show on these platforms at the same time.
Exactly. So based on your experience, you would find a need for regulations in place because children are much more susceptible than adults. But what about you, Cheska? Where do you stand on this issue?
I know there's currently a lot of debate going on and whether this will be actually a law that is instituted in the United States. But one of the things that I think about is that we have laws for driving, we have age restrictions for drinking, and now social media has gotten to the point where there is so much rampant activities that are happening that are completely unrestricted. So in a way, holding an age limitation in social media activity, I think, could be a positive way. And of course, just like with drinking and driving, parents should take part in guiding their children in terms of healthy usage of social media. And as Yoon mentioned, adults have trouble even regulating themselves when it comes to addiction with social media. But also on top of that, I do hope as we move forward, because now we're entering the metaverse and the AI technology, where they're using like fake faces and contents are coming in, online that are completely out of our hands, there should be law instituted against these measures too, so that we have a more safe ground for social media environment as well.
And I think you both made very commendable arguments here, but at the same time, I do want to play devil's advocate, because you're going to be banning all teens who once had access to these social media. And you guys all know, if you have something and then you lose it, you know that feeling, and you want to go back to it again. Yeah. So I do think that this should be considered before any final legislation is passed through. Now, heading into our main discussion topic of the day, today's not only the last day of February, but it's also the day before we celebrate the March 1st movement here in Korea. 105 years ago on this day, thousands of Koreans came out to the streets demanding independence from colonial Japan. Now, here in the studio, Cheska, why don't you tell us a little bit more about the March 1st movement?
You know, it is a remarkably significant day in Korea's history, as it is this country's independence movement day. And this year, as Yoon mentioned, marks its 105th year anniversary. So in 1919, on March 1st, according to history, was one of the largest independence movements in Korea against Japanese colonization. Now, historical records vary, but between about 1 million to about 2 million people all over Korea were involved in this movement at the time. It was a non-violent, civil disobedient protest and was met with, of course, violent forces from the Japanese police at the time. And also importantly, this was one of the very first large-scale independence movement that happened in a colonized country after the First World War.
Right, and before Yoon continues, just to give you guys a little grasp of history, Japan colonized Korea from 1910 to 1945. So just 9 years since the country was colonized, thousands came out to the streets seeking independence. Now, Yoon, would you add a little more on the history about this event?
Sure. So March 1st movement in Korea sent big waves across the world at that time. This movement positively influenced other weak small nations, just like Korea, to join the anti-imperialist movement, which led to the liberation of many countries, including Korea in 1945. So without this significant historical event, South Korea would not been able to declare independence, which we celebrate on August 15th every year. Even though Korea is still divided into two nations in armistice right now, we need to keep in mind this independence movement because it helped a small nation like us to open its doors to a country of so much peace and prosperity that we're experiencing right now. So I think tomorrow marks a very significant, important day for all of us as Koreans.
And as a person who's really interested in this historical era, I remember a lot of historians calling it a beacon of South Korea's first gesture of democracy because it was quite peaceful. Thousands just came out, regular people. And at the time, a majority of people that actually came out to the streets were young people in their 20s or 30s, actually students, right?
Yes, absolutely. As you mentioned, one of the things that really moves me about this particular movement also is that when I think about March 1st, 3.1, is that the leaders of this movement were all extremely young. We're talking about university, college students in the early 20s, some even probably our age right here at the News Generation studio. So on the day of, thousands of young people gathered in Tapgol Park while one of the independence leaders read out the Proclamation of Independence, and people started chanting, "Long live free Korea." Now, one of the quotes from the original proclamation that were written almost 100 years ago that really touched me was this. They had 3 pledges under the proclamation, and it said, quote, "We act in spirit of liberty, never in enmity. And to the last person and to the last moment, respect order in all our actions and ensure that our demeanor and claims are always honorable and upright." Now, I cannot possibly believe that in the time of fight for freedom against years and years of persecution, violence, they were still saying we do not act in enmity and we uphold honor and respect. I mean, to me, that is just, that sends me chills.
Exactly. Yeah. And to think that they were all our age, in their 20s and 30s, even younger.
Yeah.
We saw young students come out to the streets. Would you like to add on?
Right. So 3.1 was only possible thanks to the February 8th Declaration of Independence in 1919. This was a proclamation made by the Korean Young People Independence Organization, consisting of around 600 young students who actually lived in Japan at that time. So in the document, it declares that Korea is an independent state, not a colony of the Empire of Japan. So this event spread quickly back to Korea, and in just 3 weeks, invigorated the independence movement that is also known as 3.1. So this part of Korean history might not be so relatable to millennials and especially Gen Zs, However, it's definitely something that we should all be proud of and thankful, as Korea wouldn't be Korea now without those young groups of people.
Exactly. And speaking of many young people stepping up, risking their lives for the better of the country, I mean, I don't think they would have known that this would be the end result, seeking independence, because at the time we were being oppressed. We were seeing a lot of penalties for those who go against the imperial Japanese authorities at the time, yet they took the courage. So now I would like to shed light onto the actual independence fighters who were quite young and really helped Korea pave the way for independence.
One of the person that I would like to introduce today, he is Yoon Dong-ju. He is a poet and an activist, and he is one of the definitions, I would say, and representation of non-violent activist in that he wrote a number of poems about freedom and independence. He published a poem called Seoshi, called The Heavens, the Wind, and the Stars and the Poetry, and he continued to write about his desire for the country's freedom and also his tortured heart that he couldn't do more for the country. Now, one of his poems, Seoshi, reads, "Let me have no shame under the heaven till I die." He was arrested by Japanese police and unfortunately died as young as 28 in the prison. Now, he's still remembered and revered as Korea's national literary figure, and Yoon Dong-ju left a lasting contribution to Korea's history through his poems that perhaps I do believe were confessions of his poor heart.
And you can see that Yoon Dong-ju used his literary talent to actually contribute to the independence movement. Were there any other independence activists that really contributed to our future now?
Yes, another historical figure in Korea is Yoo Kwan-soon. She's one of the most famous Korean independence activists and a symbol for the movement. She played a big role in the nationwide protests where people chanted, "Long live Korean independence." She was imprisoned, but continued her fight for Korean independence. She died at a young age of only 18 after being tortured and beaten up by the Japanese military. She wrote while in prison, "Even if my fingernails are torn out, my nose and ears ripped apart, my legs and arms crushed, this physical pain does not compare to the pain of losing my nation. My only remorse is not being able to do more than dedicating my life to my country." So just by seeing what she did, even in prison, fighting until her death for the independence of our country, I feel very proud at the moment. And really, these figures, not just these two, but there are many more that we should be remembering right now.
Exactly. These two, though they're representative, there were so many thousands of other young independence fighters. And if you really think about it, they were just our age. They had a bright future ahead of them, even though they were living in quite depressing historical times. And though this is just limited to Korea, I'm well aware that so many other countries have history like us, whether they had an oppressive colonial power colonizing or imperializing their nation or fighting for independence. That is why we asked our viewers if they have any notable youth heroes or independence activists in their country. So take a look at the screen to find out what 3 of our global viewers had to share with us. Let's start with Tim. Tim said in Singapore, there's Lim Bo-sung, who was a fighter against the Japanese. In Australia, there's Ned Kelly, who's Australia's greatest rebel hero. Groovy King said, talk about Chhatrapati Sambhaji and Shivaji. They were historical warriors and kings of Maratha Empire who wanted to free India from its foreign invasions when the foreign invaders started persecuting the native culture and people. Benny said, a historical figure from the Philippines is Emilio Aguinaldo, the Philippines' first ever president, and he led our country's independence against the Spanish and later American colonizers. And the reasons why we're introducing the March 1st movement on today's episode on NewsGen is to look back at history and really reflect on how our ancestors paved the way for a better future for us. And I think our generation really should be aware that history is important because we don't want to repeat past mistakes, but also use it as a great barometer or maybe like a mirror as to find out what we should better do for its future. But how exactly are we interested in history? Do you think we are?
Unfortunately, and perhaps due to the 150th year anniversary and the time being so long, many young people do not actively, I think, commemorate March 1st, let alone know what the day actually stands for, other than it is a red holiday on a calendar. While I do completely understand that it seems so distant at a time where everything happens in a borderless web, where freedom is so freely given, it is important to at least understand the magnitude of what we have been given by the sacrifices of those who came before us. As we mentioned mentioned with Yoon on the last episode, history is a true reflection of who we are, to where we're headed. So I do hope that we make an effort to really remember that.
Yoon, what about you? What do you think? Do you think our generation is well aware about the importance of history?
To be honest, not really, because I do agree with what Cheska mentioned. You know, not many people are really interested in history and aware of these important events unless we're really educated and told by our parents from a young age. Now, I too lived abroad from a young age, so I didn't really grow up learning about Korean history, but one way that I did actually find out was through Korean films that were actually made to reiterate these past important events, historical events. And so I actually learned quite a lot through watching these films. And so for those who are not so much interested in Korean history or learning about history through books or through their parents, maybe this could be one entertaining way to actually learn about the past.
Exactly, and it's no doubt that it's important to learn history because we don't want our past mistakes to be repeated, but also it's a great time for us to commemorate all these historic heroes out there that really gave us what we're enjoying now, which is exactly why we're going to hear from a fellow Gen Z who knows all of this, the meaning and value of history. Stay tuned for our live interview. Why is history important, and how can we benefit from our learning more about our past? To answer that, we have Pan Junyoung, a Gen Z who claims to love history himself. Welcome, Junyoung.
Hello, thank you for having me.
All right, Junyoung, you're speaking on behalf of all those history lovers out there. So since when did you build an interest in history, and just how much do you like this subject area?
Well, I cannot remember exactly when, but I think my interest began growing since I was in elementary school. At first, history was not my favorite because it was difficult to memorize all the details, like names of the king, years, and the order of the historic events. And Korea has such a long and complicated history. But the more I study and learn history, the more I realize how thankful we are and how amazing this country and our ancestors are. Also, I think learning history is the most powerful way to understand who I am, which is another reason why I love it. So I kept studying it even after graduating high school myself, and I got certificate for Korean History Proficiency Test Level 1, which is the highest level.
Wow.
Wow. I'm just going to quote you right there because you said something so beautiful. You said history is a powerful way to learn about yourself. So it seems like you must have your favorite historical figure. We would love to know who it is and how you commemorate this person.
Well, my favorite historical figure is An Jung-geun. He's remembered for his assassination of Ito Hirogumi, who has served as the first resident general of Korea. His courage to assassinate the Japanese politician itself is already impressive. But what makes my favorite figure is what he said during the trial. He insisted that he did nothing wrong. Instead, he recited reasons why Ito should be killed. Even facing the death, he was brave, and he was ready to die for the independence of Korea. There's a musical, Yoon, which is about An Jung-geun's life. I watch the musical whenever I get a chance. Also, on February 13th, which is well known as Valentine's Day, is actually the day that An Jung-geun was sentenced to death by the Japanese imperialism. So on that day, I spent some time to commemorate and appreciate him.
Thank you for letting us know. Tomorrow is 3.1절, and a day we commemorate all of our independence fighters who sought independence from colonial Japan. So how is planning to spend tomorrow, Junyoung?
Well, as you can see, I already prepared taegukgi to hoist it. Also, this Monday, I visited Tapgol Park, a historically important park as the site of origin of the March 1st movement in 1919. It is the first location for the reading of the Proclamation of Independence. Tomorrow, I'm planning to watch one of those movies about our independence fighters like Yoo Sun and Yoon Dong-ju, like you mentioned. Also, I'll join one of our campaigns to commemorate the Independence Movement Day and donate 31 won per one hooray.
Chunyoung, based on all the photos we just saw, it seems like it's not the first time that you commemorate days like March 1st or other historical monuments in Korea's history by going out to the historical sites and bringing out your taegukgi. So how would you like other millennials and Gen Z to spend days like 삼일절 or better commemorate major historical milestones?
Well, I heard someone said that the independence of Korea was accomplished by the Allied powers, especially the U.S., instead of by ourselves. But I do believe that thanks to the continuous independence movement and unyielding heart, Korean could keep the identity and the spirit. And this finally led to independence. There's saying that a nation that forgets its past has no future. With that in mind, I hope millennials and Gen Z not to consider tomorrow simply as a holiday. Instead, it would be much better if they join the campaign, visit historic sites, or watch movies to commemorate the historical milestones. Nowadays, there are so many different interesting ways to remember the figures. So I wish they make use of these opportunities actively.
Just like yourself, Chunyoung. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Chunyoung's interview just really shook me a bit. It was quite motivational and inspirational to see a fellow millennial and Gen Z go out to historical sites with his national flag and remember all these historical figures.
Beautiful.
And based on that, do you guys have any special plans for 삼일절, or are you willing to change them just like Chunyoung?
I'm totally inspired, and I feel like I will be upgrading my plans for tomorrow. I would definitely be hanging out the Korean flag as we do on national holidays. But since he said, visiting Tapgo Park, I think is one of them, and talking about Yoon Dong-ju, as Yoon mentioned, there's a movie about Yoon Dong-ju's life, so I might watch it, and also I have his poem book that I probably might read it again. So just like what he said, probably more things to really commemorate the day and have the day to myself.
All right, what about you, Yoon?
I will obviously take a day off, just like everyone else, rest a bit. But at the same time, think back on these past events and just really be thankful and not really forget about these important events, because without these events and these kind of young people, like they were much younger than me right now.
So much, yeah.
All the suffering they went through, because without them, like I said, there will be no present right now, and of course without history there will be no future.
Yes.
And Jessica just talked about some of the films that we could actually watch. There's Dongju,
That was one.
Hunger, and 말모에 as well, that really relates to what really happened at that time in Korea.
So watching films could be a
not?
stepping stone, I guess, especially for those of you who might find this subject area of history to be too distant or something that you have no knowledge about. Just think of it as like a new type of content. You're seeing a lot of different films come out, even animation, stories, or even better, why don't you use this time to talk to your grandparents, because they can give you actual first-hand experience of what it was like to live at the times. But most importantly, I hope one thing you can take away from today's episode is that we should remember March 1st movements, 삼일절, as a beacon of where South Korea is at today, independence. Now, we'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Jessica Dainong.
Pleasure's always mine, thank you.
And Park Ki-hoon.
Thanks for having me.
All right, and thank you everyone for watching. Have a wonderful 삼일절, and we'll see you next week. We are News Generation.